The music was soft that night, violins drifting through the grand ballroom, glasses clinking like tiny bells under 1,000 golden lights. Ethan Walker stood near the marble staircase, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile rehearsed. In a few minutes, he was supposed to announce his engagement, the merger of two powerful families, the next chapter of a perfectly planned life. But plans have a way of breaking. One message, just one line on his phone, and everything collapsed. Claire wasn't coming. The woman he thought he'd marry was already on a plane to Rome with someone else. Around him, laughter floated through the air, untouched by the storm rising inside his chest. He tried to breathe, but the room suddenly felt too small, too bright. He didn't notice the soft footsteps behind him, or the familiar voice that would soon change everything. "Mr. Walker, are you all right?" Lily Brooks, his quiet, dependable assistant, 3 years by his side, invisible in the background. Until tonight, and that was the moment Ethan's world shifted not with a crash, but with a whisper. Because sometimes, the night that shatters everything is the same night that begins something we never saw coming. Soft piano music flowed through the grand ballroom, weaving between the murmur of expensive conversations and the faint clink of champagne glasses. The chandeliers above glowed like constellations, scattering light across marble floors and sequined gowns. It was the kind of night people would remember for beauty alone unless they were Ethan Walker. He stood near the edge of the crowd, one hand loosely gripping a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched. The cuff of his tailored jacket brushed against the cold surface of the glass as he scrolled through the message again. Just a single line. "I'm sorry. Ethan, I can't do this. I've left for Rome." The words glared back at him under the soft light of the ballroom, quiet and merciless. He'd read them 5 times, maybe 10, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something that hurt less. But they didn't. Around him, the string quartet played a love song, slow, deliberate, and cruelly beautiful. The kind of melody meant to escort a happy announcement, not the silent collapse of one. For a man known for composure, Ethan was unraveling quietly. His chest felt tight, his pulse heavy. Somewhere behind the elegant mask of confidence and control, the 29-year-old CEO of Walker Industries was just lost. He tried to look calm as people drifted past, glasses raised, smiles polished. The Montgomery's board members were here, journalists too. Everyone expecting the big announcement, the perfect merger between two empires. Claire Montgomery, daughter of Chicago's most powerful investment family, was supposed to stand beside him in 10 minutes. Smile, wave, promise a future that now no longer existed. He could almost hear the whispers starting already. "Where's Claire? Why is he alone?" A sharp breath left him as he turned toward the hallway. The polished floor mirrored his reflection, impeccable suit, flawless tie, but eyes that looked like they'd been left out in the rain. He walked out of the ballroom before anyone could stop him, down the quiet corridor that led to the terrace. The doors swung open, letting in a rush of night air, cold, real. Outside, the city stretched below like a field of stars fallen onto the streets. He loosened his tie and leaned against the railing, letting the chill bite into his skin. For a long moment, he said nothing. The kind of silence that only follows betrayal, the stillness after a bridge collapses. Then came a voice behind him, soft, familiar. "Mr. Walker." He turned. Lily Brooks stood a few steps away, her dark hair pulled neatly back, her ID badge glinting under the dim terrace light. She was supposed to be inside, coordinating the press section. But her eyes told him she already knew something was wrong. Ethan tried to straighten up, mask it all over again. "Everything's fine. Lily, go back inside." She didn't move. That's what people say right before everything falls apart. Her tone wasn't bold, just honest. It landed somewhere deep, right where his walls had started to crack. Ethan exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. She left. Just like that. He lifted the phone, screen still glowing. No fight, no warning, just gone. Lily stepped closer, the sound of her heels faint against the stone floor. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and somehow, the simple sincerity of it felt more grounding than anything else that night. He looked at her, really looked maybe for the first time. She'd always been there in the background of his day's early mornings, late meetings, reminders, and quiet efficiency. But now, under the soft city light, she wasn't just his assistant. She was a calm presence in the chaos. "It's ironic," Ethan said, his voice low. "Tonight was supposed to secure everything: the company, the deal, the future. And now," Lily asked. He glanced back at the ballroom through the glass doors. Laughter still spilled out, golden and detached. "Now, I guess it's just me and 1,000 people waiting to see me fail." Lily didn't flinch at his bitterness. "Then don't let them see it," she said gently. He frowned, turning toward her. "What do you mean?" "Go back in there," she said. "Hold your head high. You don't owe anyone your pain. Not tonight." He studied her for a long second. "And what happens when they ask where she is?" Lily hesitated, then met his gaze steadily. "Then maybe you don't have to face them alone." Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Lily, I'm just saying," she continued, her voice soft but certain. "If walking back in there means keeping your company's name intact, I'll walk beside you, for tonight just as a friend." Her offer hung in the cold air, fragile yet solid somehow. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the city lights reflected in her eyes, the way she didn't look away when he did. Finally, he nodded. "You'd really do that?" She gave a faint smile. Someone should remind them that Walker Industries stands tall, and maybe someone should remind you too. He almost smiled back. Almost. The ache in his chest eased, just slightly, as if her steadiness had shifted something. Inside, the band changed tempo, cueing the next dance. Guests would be wondering where the host had gone. Ethan straightened his jacket, slipped his phone into his pocket, and turned toward the door. "All right," he said softly. "Let's face them." Lily fell into step beside him, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. As they walked, their reflections moved together across the glass, two figures caught between worlds, between what was ending and what hadn't yet begun. At the threshold, he paused. The sounds of music, laughter, and champagne rose around them once more, pressing in like heat. He glanced sideways at her. "Lily, thank you." For what she asked, for showing up, he said simply. She smiled small, genuine. "That's what I do, Mr. Walker." Then they stepped into the light. The room shifted almost instantly, eyes turning, whispers rising, cameras lifted, somewhere. The PR manager gasped in relief, thinking the crisis had been avoided. But Ethan barely heard them. For the first time that night, his heartbeat began to slow. Not because the problem had vanished, but because standing next to him was someone who saw him not as the CEO, not as the man who'd just been left, but as a human being holding himself together. As they walked deeper into the sea of people, the music swelled. Lily's hand brushed his in accident, or maybe not. The contact steadied him. Somewhere behind the crowd, a photographer lifted his camera. The flash went off, catching them mid-step, side by side beneath the chandelier light. It was only a moment, a single frame in a long night. But later, that photo would travel across every news site, every headline, every whisper in the city. And neither of them knew it yet, but that quiet, ordinary gesture was the beginning of everything that would change. The flash from the camera still burned faintly in Ethan's vision as the ballroom doors closed behind him. The hum of applause and chatter faded, replaced by the long, hollow echo of his footsteps in the marble hallway. The gold light from the chandeliers spilled through the open doors. But out here, the air felt colder, sharper. He loosened his tie, finally letting the breath he'd been holding escape. For a moment, he simply stood there alone in a corridor lined with mirrors and silence. the kind of silence that made every thought sound too loud. His reflection stared back at him from the polished glass. Same man, same suit, but something was gone. He didn't know whether it was pride, certainty, or just the illusion of control. He'd spent years mastering that control, over deals, over people, over himself. But tonight, everything had slipped through his hands like water. Behind him, the muffled music rose again. Another dance, another toast. He wondered if anyone inside could feel how hollow the night had become. He pressed his palms against the edge of the marble counter beside the elevator, feeling the cool stone ground him for a second. Then, soft footsteps, steady, measured. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lily always walked that way, careful, respectful, but never timid. Mr. Walker. Her voice carried just enough warmth to break through the frost of his thoughts. He straightened, though his shoulders still felt heavy. "You should be inside," he said quietly. "You don't have to follow me out here." "I know," she replied. "But you looked like you needed someone who wouldn't ask questions." That made him look up. For a man used to people who always wanted something from his attention, his approval, his power, that single sentence hit differently. Lily stood a few feet away, the city lights catching the faint shimmer of her earrings. She wasn't glamorous like the women inside, but there was something grounding about her presence like steady light on rough water. She held a small glass of water in one hand. "You didn't drink anything," she said simply, offering it to him. Ethan hesitated, then took it. His fingers brushed hers for a brief second, enough for her to feel the tension still running through him, like a quiet storm. "Thank you," he murmured. They stood there in stillness. Somewhere down the hall, a waiter passed carrying a silver tray. The scent of roses from the ballroom drifted through the air. Lily's voice broke the quiet. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." He looked out toward the city, the skyline shimmering behind the tall glass windows. "She left," he said at last. "Claire." She texted right before the announcement. "She's on a plane to Rome." Lily didn't gasp or fill the silence with sympathy. She just let it be. A kind of still understanding hung between them. After a while, she asked softly, "What are you going to do?" Ethan gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "I have no idea. Everyone in there thinks I'm about to announce my engagement. Instead, I'm standing here trying not to fall apart." "You didn't fall apart," she said. "You walked back in. That's something." He turned toward her, the corner of his mouth twitching in the faintest hint of a smile. "You saw that I was watching from the press section," she said. "You looked composed." She paused, then added more softly, "Even though I could tell you were breaking." The honesty in her words was both comforting and unbearable. Ethan looked down at the floor. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. Lily, it's not your job." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe not, but I've been your assistant for 3 years. I've seen you hold this company through worse storms than a canceled engagement. You'll get through it." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that this was just another storm. But something about tonight felt different, more personal, more final. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's strange," he said. "When you spend your life preparing for everything, you forget that the things that hurt most are the ones you never plan for." Lily's expression softened. "That's life, Mr. Walker. The things we don't plan for are usually the ones that change us." He met her eyes. For a moment, neither of them looked away. Then a distant burst of laughter spilled from the ballroom. The sound seemed to echo cruelly in the corridor. Ethan set the glass down on the counter, the faint clink marking the end of that moment. "I should go," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Go where she asked gently." "I don't know. Maybe home." "You shouldn't drive tonight," she said, not as an order, but as quiet concern. "Let me call a driver." He hesitated again, then nodded. "Thank you." Lily. She made the call while he stood by the window, watching the city glitter below. When she hung up, she didn't move to leave. Instead, she leaned against the wall beside him, keeping a respectful distance but somehow filling the space with calm. After a while, he spoke again. You know, I always thought I'd feel angry if she left. Betrayed. But all I feel is tired. Lily nodded slowly. Sometimes, exhaustion is just the heart's way of saying it's had enough pretending. He glanced at her, a small flicker of surprise in his eyes. You always talk like that. Only when people forget they're human, she said with a soft smile. Something in her tone made him chuckle quietly, a sound that felt foreign after hours of tension. He shook his head. You're good at this. Calming chaos. She tilted her head. Maybe because I live in it every day. For the first time that night, Ethan's posture eased. The sharpness in his expression softened into something quieter, almost boyish. If only for a second. The elevator chimed softly at the end of the hall. Lily glanced toward it. Your car will be ready soon, she said. He nodded, but didn't move. The air between them felt suspended, like time had slowed just long enough for him to remember what gentleness felt like. Lily, he said after a pause, why did you come after me? Really? She met his gaze steadily. Because sometimes the person who seems strongest is the one most in need of someone staying. Her words landed softly but deeply. He didn't reply, just looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Down the hall, the elevator doors slid open with a muted chime. Lily straightened her blazer. That's your cue, she said. Ethan finally took a step toward the elevator, but before entering, he turned back to her. Lily, she raised an eyebrow slightly. Waiting. Thank you, he said again. But this time the words carried weight. Not for the water, for being here. She gave a faint nod. Get some rest. Mr. Walker? The doors closed between them with a soft click. Lily stood there for a while, alone now in the quiet hallway. From inside the ballroom, the music swelled once more, bright and distant. She could still see the faint reflection of herself in the glass steady, composed, but her eyes lingered on the empty space where he had just been. Something had shifted tonight, not loudly, not dramatically, but like the first tremor before a change of season. And though she didn't know what it was yet, she could feel it in the quiet of her chest that nothing about her life, or his, would ever be quite the same again. The night outside the Crystal Grand had turned colder, though the ballroom still shimmered behind the tall glass doors. Lily stood by the window, watching Ethan's car disappear into the city lights. The echo of their brief conversation lingered in her chest, soft, unfinished. She wrapped her arms around herself, drawing in a slow breath before heading back toward the noise. Duty never waited, not even for heartbreak. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with speculation. Guests whispered in clusters, PR agents hurried between tables, and the string quartet played louder, as if music could drown rumor. Lily moved quietly through the chaos, her expression calm, her steps deliberate. She'd learned that calm could spread faster than panic if you wore it convincingly enough. Ethan's absence had not gone unnoticed. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. The Montgomery family's partners were still present, their smiles tight, their eyes calculating. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, a public sealing of two dynasties. Now, the narrative was slipping through everyone's hands. Lily reached the event coordinator near the entrance. Push back the press conference by 15 minutes, she said softly. Tell them Mr. Walker will make a brief appearance first. The coordinator hesitated. He's still here? He will be, Lily said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Her voice left no room for doubt, and the woman nodded, scurrying off to make the change. Lily stood still for a moment, scanning the ballroom, the sea of elegant gowns, polished smiles, and sharp judgment. She'd been in this world long enough to know that power was as fragile as reputation. And tonight, Ethan's was hanging by a thread. When she finally stepped outside again, the hall was quieter. She found him near the far end, standing by a marble column, looking out toward the city skyline. His jacket was still perfectly pressed, but there was something in the way he held himself now, like a man standing in the ruins of something he'd built too carefully. You didn't leave, she said gently. Ethan turned, surprised to see her. I thought you'd gone home. I almost did, she admitted, walking closer. But then I remembered the investors from Lion are here tonight. The merger announcement was part of the partnership terms. If we let the press run the story their way, you could lose everything you've worked for. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the weight of exhaustion settling in. I can't walk back in there, Lily. Not after you can, she interrupted softly. And you won't have to walk in alone. Her tone was calm, but her heart was beating faster. She wasn't sure when she'd decided this, only that it felt like the right thing to do. If people are expecting to see you with someone, then they will. You just need a steady face beside you. Someone to remind them the situation is under control. Ethan looked at her as though she'd said something unthinkable. You do that. Pretend to be what my date. She smiled faintly. Your friend, your support, your assistant, if that makes it easier. Call it whatever helps you keep the company steady tonight. He studied her for a long time, searching her expression. Lily, this isn't part of your job. Neither is letting everything you've built fall apart because someone else chose to run, she replied quietly. You've stood up for hundreds of people in this company. Let someone stand up for you, just this once. The air between them thickened with silence. Then, slowly. He nodded. All right, let's do it. Lily exhaled, almost in relief, though she didn't let it show. She stepped closer, adjusting the edge of his tie, her fingers light but sure. You don't need to smile, she said softly. Just breathe and keep your shoulders up. People believe what they see before they believe what they hear. Ethan glanced down at her, at the quiet certainty in her eyes. How do you know so much about managing chaos? She met his gaze without hesitation. Because I've been managing yours for 3 years. A small, surprised laugh escaped him, quiet, almost boyish. For a moment, the weight lifted. When they reached the ballroom doors again, the hum of voices swelled to meet them. Lily paused before stepping through. If you lose focus, look at me, she said. I'll nod if you're doing fine. Shake my head if you're not. Like a secret code, he asked, like a compass. She replied, so, you don't drift. He smiled faintly, then straightened his jacket. All right, Ms. Brooks, let's give them something to talk about. As they entered, conversations faltered, heads turned, flashbulbs sparked like tiny fireworks. Ethan Walker, the heart of the evening, had returned, and beside him, a woman no one expected. Lily kept her posture graceful, every step measured. She could feel the weight of curiosity pressing on them, every whisper brushing her skin. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Ethan, as if sharing something quiet, and he followed her lead without thinking. Together, they crossed the room like a storm disguised in calm. One of the journalists stepped forward. Mr. Walker? Is everything all right? Will the announcement still happen tonight? Ethan paused, glancing briefly at Lily. She gave the faintest nod. He faced the cameras. Walker Industries will continue to honor every partnership we've built, he said steadily. Tonight is about celebrating progress, not contracts. Business continues as planned, the reporters murmured, taken aback by his composure. A few flashes went off. Somewhere in the crowd, a guest whispered, "Who's the woman with him?" Lily caught it but pretended not to. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, the quiet steadiness that had carried her through far worse nights than this. The speeches resumed, glasses clinked, the tension slowly dissolved into something resembling normalcy. But under the glittering chandeliers, Ethan kept stealing glances at her at how effortlessly she seemed to fit into a world that wasn't hers. She smiled when people greeted them, nodded when he did, never outshining, never retreating, just there. When the final toast ended, Ethan leaned slightly toward her. You were right, he said under his breath. They believed what they saw. She smiled softly. That's how stories work. You just have to give them a picture worth believing. He looked at her then, a little longer than he should have, until she turned her gaze toward the city lights outside. The music changed to something slower. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "If I ask you to dance, would it make this more believable?" Lily's lips curved gently. "It might," she said. He offered his hand. For a moment, she simply looked at it, at the quiet steadiness beneath the polished exterior. Then she took it. They moved onto the floor, the world around them fading into gold and murmurs. His hand rested lightly on her waist, hers on his shoulder, and the air between them seemed to shift. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The melody filled the space where words would have failed. When the song ended, Ethan whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Lily didn't answer right away. She just looked up at him, at the man who, a few hours ago, had been on the verge of breaking, and said softly, "This isn't the end of something. Ethan, it's the beginning of how you'll be remembered." He didn't know why, but her words lingered, long after the applause faded and the cameras turned away. And as they stepped off the dance floor, her hand still resting in his, he realized something strange. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about saving his company. He was thinking about her. The following morning unfolded under a thin veil of winter sunlight, the kind that slipped shyly through the tall glass windows of Walker Industries. The world outside was already moving, cars honking, heels clicking on wet pavement, but inside Ethan's office, time seemed slower, quieter, like it hadn't quite decided to start yet. He sat at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the dark glass. The night before still felt like smoke clinging to his skin, bright lights. Polite applause, the weight of Lily's hand in his, steady as truth. He couldn't explain why it lingered, maybe because in that moment, she had looked at him like he was more than a headline waiting to break. He tried to focus on the report spread before him, in numbers, projections, contracts, things he usually understood better than people. But every few lines, his mind drifted back to her voice, calm and certain in the middle of chaos. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, expecting an assistant from PR. The door opened, and there she was, Lily, in her usual navy skirt and cream blouse, hair pulled into a low bun. No trace of last night's glamour, except for the quiet confidence still in her eyes. She carried a folder and 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said lightly, "so I brought fuel, black, no sugar." Ethan blinked. "You remembered?" She smiled just enough for it to count. 3 years of morning meetings, she said. Some details stick. He took the cup from her, their fingers brushing briefly. Too brief, but it left a spark he hadn't expected. "Thank you," he murmured. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was soft, familiar. He studied her face as she stood by the desk, outlining updates about the Lion investors and the press coverage. She spoke efficiently, with the same precision she brought to everything. Yet, beneath the professionalism, there was warmth, something quiet and grounded that seemed to fill the space around her. He realized, with a kind of startled clarity, that he'd never really seen her before. Not like this. She had always been there early mornings, long nights, calm in every storm, but always blurred into the background of his ambition. Now, after last night, she seemed to step out of it. Lily noticed his gaze and paused mid-sentence. "Something wrong." He shook his head quickly, clearing his throat. "No, I was just thinking." Her brow lifted slightly. Dangerous habit for a Monday. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You're not supposed to make jokes in this office." "You hired me knowing I would anyway," she said simply, organizing the papers on his desk. He leaned back in his chair, watching her as she worked. Her movements were unhurried, confident, but there was also something almost tender about them, like she treated even ordinary tasks as if they mattered. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture small but strangely captivating. When she handed him a new report, he noticed a faint smudge of ink on her wrist. She must have been writing notes before coming in. Something about that small imperfection felt human, grounding, beautiful in its simplicity. He cleared his throat again, shifting his focus back to the files. So, the press? Any damage? She hesitated. Some speculation, but nothing that can't be managed. The official statement we released worked. Most outlets are calling last night a strategic postponement. He gave a short laugh. That's a poetic way of saying disaster control. Poetic sells better than panic, she said. He looked at her again, this time more openly. You're good at this. It's my job, she replied, almost dismissively. No, he said quietly. You're really good at this. Better than anyone I've ever worked with. Lily looked down, a faint color rising to her cheeks. Well, someone has to keep you from setting the building on fire. He smiled, the first genuine smile in days. I suppose I should give you a raise. Then, I'll settle for an extra lunch break, she said softly. The conversation faded into quiet again. But this silence was different, comfortable, charged. Ethan found himself studying her reflection in the glass window instead of the city skyline. The morning light caught in her hair, glinting faintly like threads of gold. He wondered how he'd spent 3 years sitting across from her and never noticed how her presence made the air less heavy. A knock at the door pulled them both back. His head of PR stepped in, holding a tablet. Mr. Walker. Just a quick update on the coverage. Ethan nodded, gesturing for her to continue. But as the woman spoke, his attention drifted again to Lily, standing quietly to the side, taking notes, her face calm and composed. Something shifted inside him then, subtle but undeniable. The realization that maybe, for all his success and careful control, the person who'd been holding his world steady wasn't a partner from a powerful family or an investor across the ocean. It was her, the quiet one, the steady one, the woman who had never asked for recognition but somehow kept everything from falling apart. When the PR head left, Lily gathered her things. You have a conference call in 20 minutes, she said. I'll make sure the documents are ready. Ethan stood, almost on impulse. Lily, he called before she reached the door. She turned. Yes. About last night, he said slowly. You didn't have to do what you did, but you did. And I won't forget it. Her eyes softened. You don't have to remember it, Mr. Walker. Just keep moving forward. That's what matters. He wanted to say something else, something that could bridge the strange, fragile space forming between them, but the words didn't come. She smiled faintly, then slipped out the door, her quiet footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, staring at the place where she'd been. The office felt too still now, too large. He turned toward the window again. The city looked different somehow, less like a battlefield, more like a living thing breathing beneath the morning light. He took a slow sip of coffee, the taste richer than usual. Maybe it was just the fatigue, or maybe it was something else, something he wasn't ready to name. Down in the reflection of the glass, he caught the faintest glimpse of her walking past the lobby below, head high, stride steady. He watched until she disappeared from view, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan Walker realized he wasn't thinking about contracts, or mergers, or damage control. He was thinking about Lily Brooks and the quiet way she'd managed to make his world feel alive again. The room was a blur of sound and light when they stepped through the double doors. The chandeliers glowed like suns above their heads, and the air crackled with murmurs and camera flashes. For a heartbeat, Ethan froze. Every face seemed to turn toward him. Investors, journalists, the Montgomery board members all waiting to see how he'd stand after last night's public storm. His chest tightened. The noise pressed in, sharp and endless. A sea of whispers rising around him, beside him. Lily sensed it the way his breathing had changed, the way his fingers twitched slightly at his side. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. Her touch was firm, steady. It's okay, she whispered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. Breathe. He did. One slow breath in, one out. The air slid back into his lungs like something rediscovered. When he looked down, her hand was still there, small but sure in his. She didn't pull away, neither did he. The cameras clicked faster now. Someone called his name, then another. Mr. Walker, over here. The flashes burst like lightning, white and blinding. The crowd moved closer, a ripple of questions. Where is Miss Montgomery? Is this the announcement? Who's the woman with you? Ethan's pulse hammered. His instinct was to retreat, to armor himself in silence as he always did, but Lily didn't move. She stood close, eyes forward, posture calm. Her hand gave a faint squeeze, a quiet signal. I'm here. Keep going. And for the first time that evening, he did. They took another step forward, then another. The crowd parted slightly, the room widening again. Ethan lifted his chin, shoulders straight. He'd faced boardrooms full of billionaires and never felt this much pressure. It wasn't the business on the line. It was his name, his composure, the illusion that he still had control. But then he looked at Lily. Something about her expression steadied him more than all the power he'd ever held. She wasn't smiling for the cameras or playing to the crowd. She was simply there, composed, unafraid, quietly loyal. And it struck him with unexpected force that this woman, this assistant he'd barely noticed for years, was the one person keeping him from falling apart. The flashes came again, louder, closer. A question cut through the air sharp, demanding. Mr. Walker, is this your fiancé? Ethan turned slightly, half blinded by the light. Lily's gaze flickered up at him, uncertain for the first time that night. The moment hung between them, stretched thin by noise and expectation. His heart pounded hard enough to drown everything else out. Something inside him shifted then. It wasn't logic or strategy, it was instinct. The kind that comes when a man stops thinking about consequences and listens to the quiet truth underneath everything. Before he could stop himself, Ethan leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't planned, it wasn't polished, just a breath, a pause, and then the world falling silent. His hand lifted, barely touching her face, his lips brushing hers in a way that was both gentle and certain. The cameras exploded in light. Gasps echoed, but he didn't hear them. For that single, impossible second, there was no ballroom, no audience, just the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth of her skin, and the dizzying realization that this, whatever this was, felt more real than anything he'd known in months. When he pulled back, the noise returned in waves. Shutters clicked like thunder. People whispered, shouted, reached for their phones. Lily blinked, her cheeks flushed, her breath unsteady. She looked stunned, caught between disbelief and something deeper she couldn't name. Ethan, she started, voice barely a whisper. He blinked too, like someone waking from a dream. He didn't finish. The words didn't come. Around them. The crowd swelled again, flashes popping, journalists leaning forward. He turned slightly, putting an arm around her shoulders, guiding her through the chaos. We're done here, he said quietly, almost to himself. They made their way toward the side exit, the murmurs chasing after them. The air outside hit colder than before, crisp against the heat still lingering on his lips. Lily stopped just beyond the door, her heels clicking softly on the marble. What was that, she asked, her voice trembling just enough to make him stop. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. I don't know, he admitted. It just happened. Lily's eyes searched his. Ethan, there were cameras. Do you realize what that means? He did. Of course he did. The story would be everywhere by morning. CEO kisses assistant. The headline wrote itself. But for once, he didn't care. Not entirely. He was still too caught in the echo of what he'd felt, a flicker of something raw, unguarded, terrifying in its simplicity. I'll handle the press, he said, voice steadier than he felt. You don't have to worry. That's not what I'm worried about, she whispered. He looked at her again, really looked her eyes, wide and uncertain, her hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold on to the moment's meaning before it slipped away. Then, what are you worried about? He asked. That maybe, she said softly, you didn't think. That maybe it was just for them. He took a step closer. It wasn't for them. The quiet stretched between them, fragile as glass. The city lights beyond the windows blurred into gold and silver streaks. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the distant hum of traffic filled the silence. Finally, Lily exhaled, her breath visible in the cold night air. You should go home, she said gently. I'll deal with the PR team tonight. It'll be messy, but we can frame it as misinterpretation, a misunderstanding. Ethan nodded slowly, though something in him resisted. He wanted to say something, apologize, explain, maybe even confess, but she had already turned away, phone in hand, professionalism slipping back into place like armor. He stood there, watching her. The woman he'd just kissed now looked like the version of herself the world always saw composed, unshakable, untouchable. But he had seen something else, something no camera could capture. He took a slow breath, shoving his hands into his pockets. Lily, he called softly. She turned, her expression unreadable. Thank you, he said. The same two words he'd told her a dozen times before. But this time, they carried a weight he couldn't disguise. She gave a small nod. Get some rest. Mr. Walker? Then she walked away, her figure fading down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing until it disappeared completely. Ethan stayed there a little longer, alone under the soft hum of the corridor lights. He could still feel the warmth of her lips, the calm of her touch, the look in her eyes before the world came rushing back. Some moments, he knew, were accidents, others were consequences. But this one felt like fate. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan Walker realized that a single kiss had just changed everything. The morning light poured through the tall windows of the Walker Industries building, clear, golden, and merciless. The city outside had already begun its day, but inside, the air carried a strange weight. Screens flickered in every office, phones buzzed, and everywhere. The same image appeared again and again, Ethan Walker, CEO of one of the largest private conglomerates in the country, kissing his assistant in front of a sea of cameras. The internet had done what it always did, turning a fleeting moment into wildfire. Headlines screamed across social media, the billionaire and his secretary. Scandal at the Crystal Grand. Who is Lily Brooks? Every angle, every frame, every rumor, it was all there before sunrise. Lily sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen, unable to move. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the endless stream of notifications. Her face was everywhere cropped beside Ethan's, frozen mid-surprise, mid-breath, mid-something she couldn't even name. She felt exposed, like her life had been cracked open for strangers to interpret. Her phone buzzed again, texts from colleagues, emails from reporters, a dozen missed calls. She turned it face down, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could slow her heartbeat that way. The PR team had sent her a draft statement to approve formal, polished, cold. A moment misinterpreted in the midst of professional stress. She read it twice and couldn't tell if she wanted to laugh or cry. The elevator chimed softly behind her. She didn't look up at first, but the quiet shift in the room's energy told her who it was before he even spoke. Morning, Lily. Ethan's voice was calm, too calm. She turned in her chair. He was standing there, earlier than usual, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the faint trace of fatigue under his eyes. Yet, somehow, he looked peaceful, not detached, not defensive, just steady, like someone who'd made peace with a storm. You're early, she managed. He gave a small smile. Couldn't sleep. She wanted to respond, but the words tangled somewhere in her throat. He stepped closer, his tone low, Warm. How bad is it? She opened her laptop again, hesitated, then turned it toward him. Every outlet's running it, she said quietly. It's everywhere. Ethan leaned forward, scanning the screen. The photographs filled the page, each one sharper than memory, frozen in the instant their lives had changed. They caught it from every angle, he said softly, almost amused. Lily frowned, startled. You don't seem surprised. He straightened, looking out the window. I'm not. I knew it would spread the moment the flash went off. Then why? She stopped herself. Why aren't you angry? He turned back to her, meeting her eyes. Because anger doesn't fix anything. And because... He paused, his voice quieter now. Because I don't regret it. Her breath caught. She blinked once, twice, unsure if she'd heard him right. You don't, Ethan. It's on every screen in America. I know, he said simply. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. She looked down, fiddling with her pen. People are saying things, she murmured, about us, about me. I know, he said again. That's why I'm here early. She looked up. His expression had softened. You shouldn't face this alone. Lily wanted to tell him she was fine, that she could handle the gossip, the speculation, the noise, but she wasn't fine. And the calm way he said it made the truth harder to deny. He moved to the coffee station near the window, poured 2 cups, and handed her one. Drink, he said gently. You'll feel better. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a second too long. How can you be so calm? She asked quietly. He smiled faintly, looking out over the skyline. Because I've spent my whole life trying to control everything. Every number, every narrative, every word. And yet one unplanned moment told the truth better than all the speeches I've ever given. Lily tilted her head. The truth. He turned to her then, his gaze steady. That sometimes, what feels real doesn't fit in a press release. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to look away, but his voice held her there. He took a sip of coffee, the faint steam curling between them. The board will be nervous, he continued. The investors will want answers, but I'm not going to deny what happened. We'll frame it as human, not scandalous. People forget CEOs are human, too. Lily nodded slowly, trying to steady her own breathing. And what about me? She asked softly. He hesitated, the question cutting through the morning, quiet. You, he said, will do what you always do. Show up, be yourself, and let me take the weight this time. There was something in his tone protective, almost tender, that made her throat tighten. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The office began to stir outside. Footsteps, distant chatter, the hum of the workday creeping in. But inside his glass-walled space, time still felt suspended. He set his cup down and walked toward his desk. I called a meeting for 10, PR, legal, and comms. You should be there. Of course, she said automatically. He smiled slightly, glancing over his shoulder. You always are. That earned a small, reluctant laugh from her. The sound felt strange, like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her quiet, thoughtful. The light caught the edge of his hair, the morning gold softening his features. Lily noticed it, and for the first time since last night, something inside her unclenched. Maybe it was the way he wasn't running from the chaos. Maybe it was how he said her name, not like a headline, but like it belonged in his day. Whatever it was, she felt the air shift again, gently. He looked at his watch. You should eat something before the meeting, he said. I couldn't, she admitted. He stepped closer, voice lowering. Then at least take a breath. You've been holding it since you walked in. She exhaled, surprised at how true that was. He smiled softly, then turned back to the window. It'll pass, he said. They'll find something new to talk about by tomorrow. Lily wasn't sure he believed that, but she wanted to. As he stood there, framed by the morning light, something about him felt different, not the powerful CEO the world wrote about, but a man quietly standing in the middle of a storm, unafraid of getting wet. And in that calm, Lily found her own footing again. She looked at him, at the man whose life had just collided with hers in the most impossible way, and thought quietly to herself, maybe peace didn't always come from silence. Maybe, sometimes, it came from the courage to stay visible, even when the world was watching. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, two people stood in the same quiet, the same light, breathing through a morning that had changed them both. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew nothing about this day, or the days after, would ever be ordinary again. The Fairmont Hotel shimmered under the late afternoon light, its marble floors glowing gold beneath the crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of place that seemed to breathe old money, quiet, polished, perfectly still. Ethan stood near the elevator doors, one hand in his pocket, the other loosely holding his phone, though he hadn't checked it in minutes. The day had been long, reporters, meetings, endless calls, but what made his pulse quicken now wasn't business. It was the thought of what he was about to do. Lily stepped out of the car behind him, her heels clicking softly against the marble. She wore a navy dress, simple, elegant, understated. It wasn't the kind of outfit meant to impress. It was the kind meant to convey quiet respect. She smoothed the hem once, as if to steady herself. Anne glanced at him. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan exhaled, a slow smile forming. "My mother asked to meet you. That doesn't happen often." "That's what worries me," Lily said, half teasing, half honest. He chuckled, though there was tension beneath the sound. "She's particular." "Particular," Lily repeated, as the elevator doors slid open. "That's one word for it." Inside the elevator, their reflections stood side by side in the mirrored walls, his dark suit, her calm presence. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit. Lily caught it, the small flicker of unease that only someone who'd watched him closely for years would notice. "She'll like you," he said suddenly, though his tone sounded more like a hope than a fact. Lily smiled faintly. "You don't know that. I know she'll see what I see." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Lily didn't quite know how to answer. The elevator chimed. When the doors opened, the scent of gardenias filled the air. His mother always requested them fresh, white, perfectly arranged. Margaret Walker sat by the window of the hotel suite, framed by afternoon light. She was the kind of woman people noticed without knowing why. Graceful, composed. The years had only sharpened her presence. "Ethan." Her voice was soft but commanding. She rose from her chair, a silk scarf draped loosely around her shoulders. Her gaze shifted from her son to Lily. "And you must be Miss Brooks." Lily stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Walker." Margaret's handshake was firm, her eyes calm but assessing. "I've heard a great deal about you," she said. "I hope only good things," Lily replied, her tone even polite. Margaret smiled just barely. "That depends on who's doing the talking." The words hung in the air, delicate but pointed. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mother?" She gestured for them to sit. "Please." I took the liberty of ordering tea. The waiter appeared as if summoned by thought's silver tray, fine china, sugar cubes aligned in the perfect rows. Lily sat opposite Margaret, posture straight but not stiff. She noticed the older woman's eyes sharp, intelligent, not unkind, but watchful. The kind of gaze that had seen enough of the world to know its masks. Margaret stirred her tea slowly. "You've worked for my son for 3 years," she said. "That must be interesting." "It's been rewarding," Lily answered carefully. "Challenging at times, but he's a fair boss." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Fair," she repeated, glancing at Ethan. "That's generous." Ethan sighed. "Mother?" "I'm teasing," she said smoothly, though her eyes didn't leave Lily's. "Tell me, Miss Brooks, do you always step into scandal so gracefully? Or Was this week an exception? The question was sharp enough to draw blood, but Lily didn't flinch. She took a quiet sip of her tea before answering. This week was unexpected, she said softly. But grace isn't what people think it is. It's just what's left when you've already decided not to break. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Ethan looked at her differently. Surprised, maybe even proud. Margaret set her cup down gently. That's quite an answer. Lily offered a small smile. It's the only one I have. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Something in Margaret's expression shifted just slightly. The steel in her gaze softened. She leaned back, studying Lily again, this time with curiosity rather than caution. You remind me of someone I used to know, she said quietly, a woman who didn't let anyone decide her worth for her. Ethan glanced between them, trying to read the undercurrent in his mother's tone. Lily set her cup down, meeting Margaret's eyes. I don't know if that's a compliment. It is, Margaret said. A small pause. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled genuine this time. I can see why my son trusts you. Ethan's shoulders relaxed a little, though he said nothing. Margaret continued, her voice softer now. You've had quite a week, Miss Brooks. The press can be cruel. I imagine this wasn't part of your plan. Lily shook her head. No, but sometimes the things we don't plan end up teaching us the most. Margaret nodded slowly, her gaze distant for a moment. True. The waiter refilled their cups and disappeared again. The sound of the city drifted faintly through the glass car horns. Laughter, life moving on outside the walls of wealth and worry. After a moment, Margaret turned to Ethan. You've changed, she said. He blinked. Changed. You used to measure your life in deals, she said simply. Now you're sitting here, introducing me to someone who makes you pause. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Lily looked down, embarrassed, but Margaret's smile stayed. That's not criticism. Ethan, it's observation. He looked at his mother, quiet gratitude flickering in his eyes. When the conversation drifted to safer ground charities, upcoming events, the weather, Lily found herself easing into it. Margaret asked about her background, her family, her work before Walker Industries. Lily answered honestly, without embellishment. She spoke of her small apartment in Cambridge, her mother's garden, the years she spent working 2 jobs before finding this one. By the end of the afternoon, Margaret wasn't watching her the same way. There was still that elegance, that reserve, but beneath it, something gentler, understanding. When they finally stood to leave, Margaret reached out, resting a hand lightly on Lily's arm. You have a quiet strength, Miss Brooks, she said. It's rare. Don't let this world take it from you. Lily met her eyes, moved by the unexpected kindness. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. Margaret nodded once, then turned to her son. Drive safely. Outside, the sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the world in gold and pink. As they walked toward the car, Ethan glanced at Lily, a faint smile playing at his lips. You handled that better than I did, he said. Lily laughed softly. You underestimate your mother. No, he said, unlocking the car. I know her too well. And I know when she's impressed. She paused, looking up at him. Was she? He smiled. She will never admit it. But yes, she was. They stood there for a moment longer, the city light wrapping around them, the tension of the day fading into something quieter. As they got into the car, the last light of evening glimmered on the windshield. Ethan started the engine, but didn't drive yet. Instead, he looked at her and said softly, Thank you for coming. Lily smiled, eyes still on the fading sky. You're welcome. The city moved around them, unaware of the small, silent shift that had just happened, not in headlines or meetings, but in the quiet space between 2 people learning to see each other more clearly. And somewhere high above, in a suite filled with the scent of gardenias, Margaret Walker sat by the window, her teacup cooling in her hands, and whispered to herself, He finally met someone who looks at him the way his father once looked at me. The following weekend, the air in Boston carried that kind of calm that only comes after rain, the streets still glistening, the world freshly washed. Lily stood by the large windows of the Fairmont suite, waiting. She could see her own reflection in the glass, a faint blur against the pale sky. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her. She wasn't nervous exactly, but there was a weight in her chest, a quiet awareness that this conversation might shape something important. Margaret Walker sat in her usual chair near the window, a pot of Earl Grey steaming between them. She looked composed, elegant as ever, her posture perfect, her pearls catching the morning light. It had been a few days since their first meeting, and Lily hadn't expected an invitation so soon. But Margaret had called herself, her tone polite, unhurried. "If you have time this weekend, Miss Brooks, I'd like to talk again. Just us. Now." Here they were. Here they. Ethan had dropped her off at the entrance, reluctant but trusting. "You'll be fine," he'd said. She wasn't so sure. Margaret poured the tea herself, her movements deliberate. "Milk?" she asked. "Just a little," Lily replied. They sat in near silence for a moment, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but observant. Margaret's eyes lingered on Lily, thoughtful but unreadable. "You've had quite a week," Margaret said at last. Lily gave a small, careful smile. "It's been a lot." "People talk," Margaret said softly, stirring her tea. "They always do, especially when something doesn't fit their expectations." "I know," Lily said quietly. "I try not to let it change me." Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying her. Most people would say that. Few mean it. Lily met her gaze without hesitation. "I mean it." The older woman's lips curved in the faintest smile. "You remind me of someone," she said. "My younger self, perhaps." A woman who had to stand straight even when the world bent her in half. Lily wasn't sure what to say to that, so she stayed silent. Sometimes silence was the most respectful answer. Margaret set down her cup and folded her hands. "You know," she said, "when I first saw that photo of you and Ethan, I felt protective of him, maybe even defensive. He's my son. I've seen people use his name, his kindness, his trust. It's easy to smile at a man like that when he's standing in the light." "I understand," Lily said softly. Margaret's eyes held hers. "But not many stay when the light changes." Lily nodded. "The light always changes." The room went quiet again, the hum of the city just faintly audible through the glass. "I came to this meeting," Lily said finally, "not to defend myself. Mrs. Walker, I don't think I could, even if I tried. I came because I respect your son, and I didn't want you to think I'm here for anything more than that." Margaret's gaze softened, though her tone remained measured. Respect can mean many things. "I know," Lily said, "but what I feel for Ethan isn't something I can dress up with the right words. He's a good man, flawed, yes, guarded, sometimes so hard on himself it hurts to watch. But when he listens, really listens, he changes things. Not just business, people." Margaret's lips parted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Lily continued, her voice quiet but steady. "He doesn't see it. He thinks all he does is work, lead, build, but he also heals. Sometimes without even knowing it." A pause. Then Margaret whispered, "You see him." "I try to," Lily said. "That's all." Margaret leaned back, exhaling softly. Her eyes glistened, though her composure never slipped. "You speak about him differently than most people do." "I'm not most people," Lily said, a gentle humor in her tone. That made Margaret laugh softly, the sound small but genuine. "No," she said. "I suppose you're not outside." A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing across the table between them. It made the china glow, the steam curl upward like something alive. Margaret reached for her cup again, but her voice was different now, warmer, quieter. "When Ethan's father died, he changed," she said. "He became colder, more careful. I don't blame him. Grief can do that. But I've spent years hoping someone would come along who could remind him that vulnerability isn't weakness. Lily looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I don't know if I can do that. Maybe you already have, Margaret said. The words lingered between them, soft but certain. Lily felt something tighten in her chest, part disbelief, part gratitude. Margaret continued, the press will lose interest, the noise will fade, but what matters is what's real when the lights go out. That's the part no one else gets to see. Lily looked up, and in that moment, the distance between them, age, class, experience seemed to dissolve. Two women, both shaped by loss and by love, both trying to protect the same man in their own ways. I never thought I'd find myself sitting here, talking like this, Margaret admitted. But life has a strange way of reminding us what still matters. Lily smiled softly. Sometimes it takes a scandal. Margaret chuckled quietly. Sometimes. They finished their tea in companionable silence. The clouds drifted away, and the light grew stronger. Margaret stood, smoothing her silk scarf. She walked to the window, looking out over the city, then spoke without turning around. Miss Brooks, she said, her voice gentle. Whatever happens next, promise me one thing. What's that? Don't let this world make you hard. It has a way of doing that, especially to women who are kind. Lily rose, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try. Margaret turned then, her eyes soft but certain. Good, she said, because I think my son finally met the right person. Lily froze. The words landed like a quiet tide, unexpected, steady, impossible to ignore. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked at Margaret, half expecting to see a smile that gave the moment away as jest. But there was no jest, only truth, simple and sincere. Margaret walked closer, taking Lily's hand gently between her own. He needs someone who reminds him what love looks like when it's not perfect, she said. And from where I'm standing, I think you already have. Lily felt warmth rise behind her eyes, but she blinked it back, managing a small nod. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. Margaret squeezed her hand once, then let go. Call me Margaret, she said. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the room in gold. The moment held quiet, unspoken, real, and, as Lily stepped out of the hotel later that morning, the breeze caught the edge of her hair, lifting it gently. She didn't look back, but she carried Margaret's words with her, like a seed planted somewhere deep in the heart. Something had taken root that day. Not just trust, but belief. The city outside the Walker Industries tower was a blur of silver and blue. Rain brushed softly against the windows, streaking the glass like threads of quiet light. It was long past dinner, but the office still hummed faintly with the sound of air vents and distant keyboards. On the top floor, only one light remained on the soft amber glow from Ethan's office. Inside, the world felt smaller, warmer, and strangely at peace. Lily sat at the small table by the window, a box of takeout balanced between stacks of folders. The smell of soy sauce and warm rice mixed with the faint scent of paper and coffee. Ethan was across from her, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, his jacket draped carelessly over the back of a chair. He was still in work mode, but the sharpness in his eyes had softened. This might be the worst dinner we've had all week, he said, poking at a piece of cold lo mein with his chopsticks. Lily smiled faintly. And yet, you keep asking for it. He looked up at her. Habit. Or maybe comfort, she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. The rain tapped against the window, steady and slow. Maybe both, he said finally. They fell into a companionable silence. The room was dim except for the desk lamp and the soft city glow seeping through the glass. Papers were scattered across the desk, proposals, financial projections, notes in Ethan's precise handwriting, but none of it felt as urgent as it used to. There was something about the way the night wrapped around them, soft and forgiving, that made everything else seem far away. Lily broke the silence first. Do you ever think about how much time we spend here? Ethan glanced around. Too much. Most people go home at 5. He smiled slightly. And most people don't run a company like this. She tilted her head, teasing gently. And what about people like me? I don't run anything. He looked at her, eyes warm. You keep it running. That's not the same, but it's just as important. Her laugh was quiet, but it reached her eyes. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant to be. The rain outside grew heavier, soft thunder rolling in the distance. Lily stood and moved toward the window, watching the lights blur across the wet streets below. Her reflection hovered faintly against the glass calm, thoughtful. Ethan watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He realized, not for the first time, how easily she fit into his world without trying to change it. She didn't demand space. She simply filled it with quiet steadiness. Do you ever miss it? She asked after a while. Before all this, the pressure, the headlines, the constant noise, Ethan leaned back in his chair. I used to think I did, but when I look back, I'm not sure there was ever a before. Even as a kid, everything was about expectations. School, college, the company. It's all been one long performance. Lily turned slightly, her silhouette outlined by the faint city light. And who are you when no one's watching? The question landed softly, but it stayed. Ethan looked down at his hands, the gold of his watch glinting in the lamplight. I don't know, he admitted. I'm still figuring that out. She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. Maybe that's the point, she said gently. We're all still figuring it out. He watched her as she spoke, the calm in her voice wrapping around the chaos inside him. For someone who never sought attention, she had a way of making him listen differently to her and to himself. They went back to eating, their conversation slipping easily between work and small talk, the kind that felt natural after years of knowing each other's rhythms. She told him about the barista downstairs who kept forgetting her name but remembered her coffee order. He told her about the day he almost quit business school because he thought he'd never measure up to his father. Somewhere between laughter and silence, something shifted, something small but real. Later, when most of the boxes were empty and the paperwork had been pushed aside, Lily leaned her chin on her hand. You know, she said softly, for all the noise outside, this might be my favorite part of the job. Ethan looked up, curious. Eating takeout with your boss. She smiled. No, the quiet part. When the world finally stops asking for something, he nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, me too. The air felt still for a moment, heavy with something unspoken. She looked up at him then, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. There was nothing romantic in the gesture, not yet just the simple intimacy of two people who had learned to trust silence. Ethan finally stood, stretching his shoulders, and walked over to the window beside her. The rain had softened to a mist. The streets below shimmered like glass. You know, he said, voice low. I used to think peace meant having everything under control, but lately she prompted, lately, it feels like it's about moments like this, when nothing's perfect, but it's still enough. Lily smiled, her gaze still on the city. That's because you stopped running from the quiet. He turned to look at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. And you stopped letting me. She laughed softly, the sound almost lost to the hum of the rain. They stood there for a while longer, side by side, watching the city breathe beneath them. There were no cameras now, no questions, no headlines waiting to twist the truth, just two people sharing the same space, the same quiet. When Lily finally gathered her things to leave, Ethan walked her to the elevator. You'll get soaked, he said, noticing the rain still falling outside. I'll survive, she replied, smiling. I always do. The elevator doors opened, the soft glow of the lobby below spilling upward. She turned to face him. You should go home too. Even CEOs need sleep. He chuckled. I'll think about it. She stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors began to close, but he spoke before they did. "Lily." She looked up. "Yes, thank you. For tonight." Her eyes met his. "You don't have to thank me," she said quietly. "You just have to remember you're human, too." The door slid shut. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the reflection of himself in the polished steel. The office behind him glowed warm and golden, empty now, but not lonely. He turned back toward the window, watching the rain fade to mist, somewhere down below. He imagined Lily walking out into the night, her umbrella catching the streetlight, her pace unhurried, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, the thought made him smile. There were still deals to sign, scandals to quiet, expectations to meet, but for tonight, none of it mattered, because for the first time in years, Ethan Walker didn't feel like he was standing on the edge of something about to break. He just felt still, and in that stillness, he realized sometimes peace doesn't arrive with silence. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding a takeout box and asking if you've eaten yet. The evening air carried a softness that Boston rarely offered in early spring. The city lights shimmered on damp pavement, and a faint scent of roasted garlic and baked bread drifted from the small Italian restaurant tucked between two brownstone buildings. It wasn't a place anyone would associate with Ethan Walker, the man whose name lived on magazine covers and business columns, and that, perhaps, was the point. When Lily arrived, the place felt like it existed outside of time. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows, the sound of quiet laughter and clinking glasses filling the narrow space. The tables were close together, draped in white cloths, slightly uneven at the corners. A man with gray hair and kind eyes stood behind the counter, humming softly to an old Sinatra tune, playing through a scratched speaker. Ethan was already there, standing near the back, waiting not with the usual guarded composure he wore in public, but something gentler. His tie was gone, the top button of his shirt undone, and his sleeves rolled halfway. When he saw her, his face broke into a quiet smile that seemed to reach all the way into his eyes. "You found it," he said. "It wasn't hard," she replied, returning his smile. "You sent the car?" He laughed softly. "Fair point." As they sat, the waiter brought out a basket of warm bread and a bottle of red wine that looked far too expensive for such a small place. Lily glanced around. "You used to come here every week," Ethan said. "When I was in college, I lived 2 blocks away. The owner, Marco, used to let me eat here on credit when I couldn't afford to pay." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You... on credit?" He smiled. "Hard to imagine." "Right. I wasn't always this polished." "I don't think you're that polished now," she teased lightly. He grinned, the sound of her laughter softening something in his chest. "You're right. Maybe that's a good thing." They ordered simple dishes, pasta, salad, and a bottle of Chianti, the kind of meal that didn't need an explanation. When the plates arrived, the air filled with the scent of tomatoes and basil, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. They just ate, occasionally glancing up, smiling over small, unspoken thoughts. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. "I wanted to take you somewhere different," he said quietly. "Somewhere that isn't about business or reputation or headlines." Lily looked at him, her fork paused midair. "And this place is that?" He nodded. "This place is me before all of it. Before I became someone people expected to see on the cover of Forbes." She smiled, softly. "It's a nice version of you." He chuckled. "It's the real one." They talked about small things, then college memories, old mistakes, favorite foods, the absurdity of corporate life. For once, Ethan wasn't speaking like a CEO or thinking 3 steps ahead. He was just a man, sitting across from someone who saw him as more than his last decision. At one point, Lily leaned back, watching him. "You look lighter tonight," she said. "Do I?" "Yes. Like you finally let the world spin without trying to hold it in place." He smiled faintly, turning the wineglass in his hand. "Maybe I did." Outside, the rain started again, tapping gently against the windows. The lights reflected off the glass, turning the night into a blur of gold and gray. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a pause. "Of course. Why tonight?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for the right answer. "Because I was tired of pretending that everything between us was just work, and because—" He hesitated, voice lowering. "Because I didn't want our story to start with a scandal. I wanted it to start with something real." Her breath caught slightly. "Ethan?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady. "I know how it looks from the outside. The headlines, the rumors, all of it. I know what people think this is, but they're wrong." She didn't speak, only watched him, her hands folded gently in her lap. "This isn't about what happened that night," he continued. "It's not about damage control or loneliness or pressure. It's about the fact that somewhere between late meetings and coffee runs, you became the only person I wanted to come home to." His voice trembled slightly at the end, the honesty raw enough to unsettle him. He wasn't used to being this open, this exposed. Lily looked down at her hands, a slow warmth spreading through her chest. "You don't have to say that," she said softly. "Not to make me feel better." "I'm not trying to make you feel better," he said. "I'm trying to tell you the truth." She looked up then, meeting his eyes, and in them, she didn't see the executive everyone feared, or the polished man from the magazines. She saw the boy who once ate here on credit, the man who'd lost control of his perfect life and somehow found something better in the wreckage. He smiled faintly. "You make me quiet," he said. "That's not easy to do." Lily's laughter came softly, a whisper more than a sound. "Quiet suits you." They both laughed then, lightly, letting the moment ease back into warmth. The restaurant buzzed softly around them, distant conversations, the clink of plates, the low hum of Sinatra still playing from the corner speaker. When the check came, Marco himself brought it over, his eyes twinkling. "For you, my friend," he said, patting Ethan's shoulder. "And your beautiful lady. It's been too long." Ethan smiled. "Thank you, Marco." As they stood to leave, Lily glanced around one more time. "It's lovely here," she said. "It feels like a memory someone forgot to pack away." He nodded. "That's exactly what it is." Outside, the rain had turned to a drizzle. The street lamps glowed through the mist, painting everything in gold. Ethan held the umbrella above them as they walked toward the car. Their shoulders brushed once, lightly, unintentionally, but neither stepped away. When they reached the car, Lily turned to face him. "So, what now?" Ethan smiled, his voice soft. "Now, we let it be simple." She raised an eyebrow. "Simple." He nodded. "No statements, no headlines, just dinner, just us." Lily held his gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. "I'd like that." He opened the car door for her, then paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "So would I." She smiled, sliding into the seat, the faint scent of rain following her in. As the car pulled away, the little restaurant faded into the background, its windows still glowing softly against the dark. And inside that small, ordinary night, something extraordinary had quietly taken root. No cameras, no audience, just truth, warm and unguarded, shared between two people who had finally stopped pretending. And for Ethan Walker, it was the first time in a long, long while that honesty felt like peace. It was close to midnight when the office building finally emptied. The city outside was wrapped in rain and fog, streetlights blurring into streaks of gold against the wet pavement. Lily sat alone in the glass-walled conference room, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound left. She had stayed behind to finish reviewing the final reports from one of Walker Industries' key partners, a consulting firm handling overseas acquisitions. Ethan had already gone home hours ago, though not without telling her, half seriously, to stop saving the world past midnight. She'd smiled then, but now something in her gut told her this night wouldn't be ordinary. The documents were dense spreadsheets, summaries, signed contracts. She'd seen 100 just like them, but when she clicked through one of the folders on the shared drive, She noticed a smaller file buried beneath layers of subfolders, one that didn't belong. Its name was Vague Q4 Review, internal, harmless at first glance. But the moment she opened it, the screen filled with strings of encrypted emails and unsigned drafts of agreements. Her heart began to beat faster. The correspondences were between the partner firm's senior executive and a familiar name, Claire Montgomery. The words leapt from the screen. Dates, transfers, offshore accounts, strategic leaks. Each line carried the quiet precision of betrayal. It wasn't just financial, it was personal. Claire hadn't simply left Ethan, she'd tried to destroy him. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She scrolled faster, each email cutting deeper. The rival company one Ethan had once considered merging with was mentioned again and again. Claire had passed confidential data to them months before the public fallout. The timing was perfect, deliberate. It was the kind of move that could cripple a company from the inside out. Her fingers trembled slightly as she printed the files, watching the papers slide out of the machine one by one, the sound too loud in the quiet office. Every instinct told her to call Ethan, to tell him right away. But another part of her knew what it would mean to open an old wound, to show him proof that the woman he'd once trusted had plotted to ruin everything he'd built. She gathered the papers into a folder, her heartbeat steadying with resolve. Some truths couldn't stay hidden, no matter how much they hurt. By the time she reached Ethan's apartment, the city had gone still. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered. She hesitated for a moment in the hallway before knocking. A faint light glowed beneath the door. He opened it within seconds, barefoot, in a t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled from running his hands through it, a sign of restless thinking. His eyes softened when he saw her, but that softness quickly turned to concern. "Lily, what are you doing here this late?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held out the folder. "I found something." Ethan stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The apartment was quiet, lined with shelves of books and papers, half-finished coffee on the table. He took the folder, brows furrowing as he opened it. As he read, the silence between them grew heavier, page after page. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief, to something that looked like quiet devastation. She did this? His voice was barely a whisper. Lily nodded. "I checked the metadata. The documents were last modified before she left for Rome. She'd been working with them for months." Ethan stared at the papers, then at her, his eyes dark with something between anger and sorrow. She leaked proprietary information, trade details, client lists. That's federal-level sabotage. "She wanted to make sure the company would fall if you didn't go through with the merger," Lily said quietly, and she almost succeeded. He sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, the papers dangling loosely from one hand. "I kept thinking it was just me," he said after a long pause, "that I'd done something to drive her away. But this was never about love." Lily hesitated, unsure if she should speak. "Finally," she said softly, "it's still about something human. Ethan. Just not the kind of human you deserved." He looked up at her, the corner of his mouth curving not into a smile, but into a faint acknowledgement of her quiet courage. "You stayed late again, didn't you?" "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "So I went through the partner files. Something didn't feel right." He leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "You always notice the things I miss." The room was quiet except for the faint sound of rain returning, tapping against the windows like a whisper. Lily sat across from him, watching as he sifted through the papers again. There was a calm to her presence, even in the middle of revelation. She didn't fill the silence. She didn't try to fix his pain. She just stayed. After a while, he spoke again, voice low. "You know, when you first started working for me, I didn't think anyone could handle the pace. But you did. You didn't just keep up, you made everything better." Lily looked down, her voice a soft echo. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered. He set the papers aside, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This will start something," he said quietly. "Legal battles, media backlash, maybe even criminal charges." "I figured as much," she said. "But it's the truth. And it's yours to decide what to do with it." Ethan nodded slowly. Then, after a moment, he looked at her. Really looked at her, and there was gratitude there. Raw and unguarded. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Lily." She smiled faintly, trying to lighten the air. "Probably sleep more." He chuckled under his breath, but the weight didn't lift completely. He picked up one of the papers again, his eyes scanning the lines as if trying to make sense of how love could twist into betrayal. "I thought I'd stop being surprised by people," he said softly. "Turns out I was wrong." Lily's reply came after a beat. "Being surprised isn't the worst thing. Ethan, it means you still expect good in people." He looked at her again, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet recognition of shared strength, of two people who understood what it meant to keep believing when it would be easier not to. The clock ticked softly in the background. Midnight slipped toward morning. The rain eased again. Ethan finally stood, gathering the papers, his movement steady now. "We'll deal with this," he said. "Properly?" Lily nodded. "I'll help however I can." He gave her a small, tired smile. "You already have." As she turned to leave, he stopped her. "Lily?" She turned back, her hand still on the doorknob. "Thank you," he said quietly. The way he said it wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. Complete, unquestioned trust. She smiled gently. "Get some sleep. Ethan, you'll need it." When she stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her, the weight of the night settled over both of them. Inside, Ethan stood still, the folder in his hands like a symbol of everything he'd lost and everything he hadn't. And though the truth had come like a wound, somewhere beneath the ache was the faintest sense of relief, because, at least now, he knew where the betrayal ended, and, just maybe, where something real had begun. The morning the storm broke. The world woke before the sun. Phones buzzed. News anchors spoke in tones polished and urgent. Screens flickered with the same headline, "Claire Montgomery. Breaks silence from Europe reveals. Dark truth behind the Walker scandal." Ethan had known it was coming. He just didn't expect it to hit this hard. The press conference aired live from a hotel in Milan. Claire stood behind a podium, poised, immaculate in a white suit, her expression perfectly measured. The room buzzed with cameras and microphones. Her voice, calm but trembling in all the right places, carried across the Atlantic. "I was manipulated," she said, "misled, pressured into decisions I never wanted to make. And when I tried to leave, I was silenced." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then she added, "It wasn't Ethan Walker's hand directly, but someone close to him, someone who benefited from my silence." She didn't need to say Lily's name. The world did it for her. By noon, hashtags trended, photos resurfaced, comment sections burned, the secretary who stole everything, Billionaire's puppet master. The internet built its own story, one cruel sentence at a time. Lily sat in her small apartment, blinds drawn, the glow of her laptop screen painting her face pale. She watched Claire's speech until she couldn't anymore. Her hands trembled as she closed the screen. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at nothing. Then came the pounding reporters outside, cameras flashing through the thin curtains, voices shouting her name like a weapon. She backed away from the window, heart racing. Her phone vibrated with messages, calls from PR, from colleagues, from strangers who somehow found her number. But through the chaos, one message stood out. "Ethan, stay where you are. I'm coming." 20 minutes later, his car pulled up in the alley behind her building. She met him at the back door, coat half buttoned, her breath visible in the cold morning air. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not with pity, not even with anger, just with a fierce, unwavering calm. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "Ethan, I can't." "You can," he said, "and you will. You're coming with me." She shook her head, her voice barely steady. "If I do, they'll say it's true, that you're protecting me because you're guilty." "They're already saying that," he replied, "so let them. I'm not doing this for them." The way he said it left no room for argument. Within the hour, she was in the car beside him, her world shrinking to the hum of the engine and the blur of the highway. Neither spoke for a long time. Outside, cameras flashed as they drove through the gate to his property, a secluded townhouse on the edge of the city. Security guards closed the gates behind them, cutting off the noise, the questions, the endless chase of speculation. Inside, the silence was almost too still. Ethan turned to her. "You're safe here," he said. Lily exhaled, dropping her bag on the couch. Safe doesn't feel real anymore. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. "It will," he said softly. "You just need time." She took it, her fingers brushing his for a second too long. "You shouldn't have to fix this for me." He looked at her, his voice quiet but certain. "You didn't break it. Outside." The wind picked up, rattling the trees against the windows. Inside, the air between them felt heavier with every unspoken truth. She sat on the edge of the couch, trying to steady her breath. "They're saying I used you," she whispered, "that I wanted your money, your company, your life." Ethan knelt in front of her, his eyes steady on hers. "Do you believe them?" Her lips parted in surprise. "Of course not." "Then that's all I care about." It wasn't logic. It wasn't strategy. It was something simpler, deeper, a kind of faith that didn't need proof. He stood and walked toward the large window, pulling the curtains shut. "We'll release a statement tomorrow," he said, not to fight her, just to remind people that the truth takes time. "Let them speak tonight. By morning, we'll decide what to do." She nodded slowly, and until then, he turned back, offering a small, tired smile. "Until then, you eat, you rest, and you remember who you are." The kindness in his tone undid her. She looked down, blinking back the sting behind her eyes. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "You do," he said gently. "You just forgot what it feels like to be seen without being judged." She met his gaze, and for a moment, the noise of the world outside seemed to fade. They spent the rest of the evening in near silence. She helped him review documents, answered calls from his legal team, and sat across from him at the long oak table while the storm raged outside. Every so often, their eyes met not with fear, but with quiet endurance. Around midnight, when the last call ended and the rain softened, Lily stood by the window, staring out at the mist. Her reflection looked like someone else, someone who had aged in a matter of hours. Ethan approached quietly, stopping beside her. "They won't stop," she said softly. "Not until they get what they want." "Then we don't stop either," he replied. She turned to face him. "You could have let me go. You should have." He shook his head. "That's not who I am, and it's not who you are." The clock ticked softly. The room smelled faintly of rain and paper. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading as it passed. Lily looked at him, voice breaking slightly. "Why are you doing this?" "Ethan," he took a breath, "because when the world starts tearing something apart, someone has to hold it together. And this time, that's going to be me." She looked away, trying to hide the tears she didn't want him to see, but he noticed anyway. He stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against her shoulder, a gesture small enough to be appropriate, but tender enough to mean everything. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The wind pressed against the windows. The fire crackled faintly in the corner. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and for the first time in days, her body relaxed not in surrender, but in safety. As she stood there, wrapped in the quiet warmth of his home, Lily realized that storms didn't always arrive to destroy. Some came to strip away the false, leaving only what was real. And in that long, sleepless night, with headlines shouting lies and the rain whispering truth against the glass, Ethan Walker made a silent promise he'd never spoken before. He would protect her not as an act of rescue, but as an act of love. Outside, the world raged on, but inside those walls, for a brief and fragile moment, they were untouched. The days that followed blurred into one long, sleepless stretch of time. The air inside Walker Industries no longer hummed with the confident rhythm of business. It pulsed with urgency. The sound of whispered meetings and hurried footsteps. Every room carried tension. Every conversation a careful balance between strategy and survival. And at the center of it all, two people refused to break. Ethan sat in the glass-walled conference room, sleeves rolled up, jaw set. Around him, a small team of lawyers and analysts spread out files, laptops, printed statements, hundreds of pages that could decide the future of everything he had built. The scandal that Claire had unleashed wasn't just noise anymore. It had grown teeth. Investors demanded answers, board members wanted reassurance, and the press wanted blood. But then there was Lily. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She was the one holding the chaos together. While the legal team drafted motions, she cross-referenced every document she'd uncovered, connecting details others had missed. She moved quietly, efficiently, her focus unshaken even as headlines outside painted her as the villain. At one point, one of the senior attorneys, a man twice her age, stopped and said in disbelief, "Ms. Brooks, how did you find this?" pointing to a critical clause she'd discovered in an old email chain. She didn't look up from the screen. "Because I read everything," she said simply. Ethan watched her from across the table, and for a brief moment, something in his chest eased. In a world built on image, she was substance steady, meticulous, unflinching. She didn't defend herself with words. She defended with truth. By late afternoon, the team gathered around a digital board filled with evidence dates, transfers, communication logs, all tracing back to Claire's manipulation and her alliance with the rival company. It was airtight, painful, but clear. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "We can prove she lied," he said, "but proving it isn't the same as surviving it." Lily looked at him, her voice steady. "Then we do both." He met her gaze, half exhausted, half awed. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said softly, "but we've come too far to let fear decide what happens next." There was something about the way she said "we" that made him pause. The room was full of people, but that word spoken by her made it feel like it was just them. The quiet partnership that had always been there, now out in the open, no longer hidden behind job titles or circumstance. That night, long after the others left, Lily was still at the office. She sat by the window, a mug of coffee gone cold beside her, surrounded by stacks of documents. Outside, Boston's skyline glittered like a constellation of restless souls. Ethan returned from another call, exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin. "You should go home," he said gently. She didn't look up. "I am home," she murmured, flipping through another page. He smiled faintly, walking closer. "You know that's not normal, right?" "I've never been normal," she replied. He laughed under his breath. "No, you haven't." A moment passed, quiet but full. Then he said, "You don't have to carry all of this." She turned to him then, eyes calm but bright. "Neither do you." He wanted to argue, to insist that it was his burden, his company, his past mistake, but her words cut through before he could. Because she was right. They were already carrying it together. As the hours passed, their work shifted from desperation to precision. Lily drafted timelines while Ethan dictated key points for the legal statement. Every now and then, their fingers brushed as they exchanged papers, small touches that felt both accidental and charged. The night air grew colder, the city outside quieter, but inside, they were wide awake, fighting, planning, holding the line. At some point, Lily leaned back and whispered, almost to herself, "It's strange, isn't it? The way truth can be buried so deep, people forget it ever existed." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "But you didn't forget." She smiled faintly. Someone had to remember. The clock struck 2 in the morning. He poured her another cup of coffee. "You realize we're both running on fumes," he said. "I've been running on purpose," she corrected gently. "It lasts longer." He chuckled softly. "I'll quote you on that when this is over." Her expression softened, but her tone stayed practical. "You won't need to. People will see who you really are again." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What will they see when they look at you?" She hesitated for just a second. "Maybe nothing." She said, "Maybe that's fine." He didn't reply, but something in him rebelled against that thought. The world might see what it wanted, but he knew the truth: she wasn't invisible. She was the reason the walls hadn't collapsed. When dawn came, the city glowed in pale gold. The office was littered with coffee cups, empty folders, and the faint scent of paper and ink. The first team members began to arrive again, but Ethan and Lily stayed where they were, standing by the window. The light hit her face just so, softening the dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked tired, but unbroken. "Do you ever regret stepping into all this?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No. I'd rather fight beside you than watch from the sidelines." Ethan's throat tightened at that part pride, part gratitude, part something deeper he couldn't yet name. He reached for one of the files, flipping it open. Then, "Let's finish this." She nodded. "Let's." Hours later, their statement went public, calm, direct, supported by evidence. It didn't attack, it clarified. It spoke of integrity, accountability, and truth. And though it didn't silence everyone, it shifted the tide just enough. The first headlines began to turn. The first allies began to speak. The world, slowly, started to listen. That evening, as the office finally quieted again, Ethan looked at Lily across the room. She was organizing the last of the files, methodical even in exhaustion. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. "Thank you," he said softly. She smiled. "Don't thank me yet. We still have work to do." "I know," he said, "but still, thank you." Her gaze held his for a moment longer before she turned back to her work. Outside, the city pulsed with a different kind of energy, not chaos, but anticipation. The storm hadn't ended, but something had shifted, and in that quiet space between battles, Ethan realized that victory wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet heartbeat, steady and constant, shared between two people who refused to give up. Lily wasn't just fighting for him anymore. She was fighting with him, and that made all the difference. The courtroom was silent when the final verdict was read. The air felt thick, charged with months of tension waiting for release. Ethan sat at the front, his hands clasped, his expression still. He didn't move, not when the judge said the words, "Case dismissed," not when the opposing counsel lowered their heads, not even when the room erupted in whispers. It wasn't until Lily's hand brushed lightly against his arm that he finally exhaled. They had won. The evidence they'd built piece by piece had stood unshakable. Claire's deception was exposed, the rival company's collusion proven. The press that once tore them apart now wrote headlines with words like redemption and integrity. But none of that mattered in that first quiet moment. What mattered was the look they shared, wordless, tired, relieved. The kind of look that comes after surviving a storm together. Outside, flashes lit up the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan walked past them, one hand gently guiding Lily through the crowd. For the first time in months, his stride felt light again. In the following weeks, the tide turned completely. Walker Industries didn't just recover, it rose higher than before. Investors returned, partnerships reignited. The company's stock surged, regaining the trust that had once seemed lost forever. Yet through all the congratulations and celebration, Ethan's focus remained quiet. He'd learned something about strength, that it wasn't loud. It was the calm persistence of those who refused to give up, even when no one was watching, and no one embodied that more than Lily Brooks. She continued her work as she always had, steady, precise, unassuming. While others praised Ethan for his leadership, he knew the truth. She had been the backbone of it all, the reason the company stood, the reason he stood. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, Ethan called a meeting in the boardroom, the same room where months earlier he'd stood defending his choices to skeptical faces. Now, the air was different, hopeful, expectant. Lily sat quietly at the side, unaware of what was about to happen. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his voice calm but certain. Walker Industries wouldn't be here today without one person's courage, intelligence, and integrity, he said, and it's time we acknowledge that properly. He turned toward her, effective immediately. Lily Brooks will serve as Chief Operating Officer. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then filled with applause. Lily froze, disbelief flickering across her face. Ethan, he smiled. Don't argue. You've earned this more than anyone here. Her throat tightened. I was just doing my job. No, he said softly. You were doing what was right. For a moment, her composure broke. She looked down, blinking quickly, before finally meeting his eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The applause faded, but the warmth lingered. The board members congratulated her one by one, but Ethan barely heard them. His focus stayed on the quiet pride in her expression, the way humility and strength seemed to live side by side in her eyes. That evening, the office lights dimmed as the city outside turned golden. Ethan stood by the window, watching the skyline. Lily joined him, still a little dazed from the day's events. You didn't have to do that, she said gently. He turned to her. Yes, I did. The company needs someone like you leading it forward. She smiled faintly. And what about you? I'll still be here, he said, just not carrying it alone anymore. A quiet pause settled between them, the kind that doesn't need words. After a while, she said softly, it feels strange. To win after losing so much. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what makes it real. You can't appreciate peace until you've lived through the noise. Outside, a light breeze brushed against the glass, carrying the distant sound of the city below, honking cars, laughter, life moving on. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. You look lighter? He smiled. So do you. She tilted her head, thoughtful. Do you ever think, maybe everything had to fall apart for this to happen? He considered that for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe it just had to fall apart so we could see what was worth saving. Her eyes softened. And what did you find worth saving? Ethan, he looked at her, really looked, and the answer came quietly, without hesitation. You. The word hung in the air, simple and honest. No grand gesture, no dramatic pause, just truth. She didn't respond right away, but her eyes said enough. Gratitude, warmth, something deeper that had grown slowly, quietly, through every shared late night, every hard decision, every moment they stood side by side. The sun dipped lower, painting the office in amber light. The walls that once felt cold now glowed warm, like a promise kept. Later that week, when news broke of Walker Industries' resurgence, Ethan received hundreds of messages from peers and journalists. Congratulations. Remarkable comeback. Incredible leadership. He responded politely but briefly, because none of them understood what the victory truly meant. It wasn't about reputation or stock prices. It was about redemption, about finding humanity again in a world that often forgot it. And that humanity had a name. That night, as they walked out of the building together, Lily paused at the steps, looking up at the logo gleaming on the tower. It's strange, she said softly. It feels new again. Ethan followed her gaze. It is new, he said, Because this time, it's built on truth. She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips that carried the weight of everything they'd endured. The city lights shimmered against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that glow, the old wounds began to fade, replaced by something steadier, hope, and though neither said it out loud, both knew the same thing. They hadn't just rebuilt a company, they'd rebuilt each other. The night air was cool, gentle, alive with promise, and as they stood side by side, the world that once tried to break them seemed, at last, to bow in quiet respect. The morning light crept through the curtains, soft and golden, spilling across the hardwood floor of the Manhattan apartment. Outside, the city was still waking the hum of traffic distant, the sky streaked with pale pink. Inside, everything was quiet, still, the kind of quiet that holds something sacred. Ethan stood in the kitchen, barefoot, his sleeves rolled up, the smell of coffee filling the air. Lily was sitting on the couch, one knee drawn up, reading through a report she hadn't needed to look at. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulder, catching the light like strands of silk. She looked calm, unguarded, the version of herself he loved most. He watched her for a moment, the way she always tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the small crease that formed between her brows. 3 years ago, she had been his assistant, efficient, composed, professional. Now, she was something else entirely. She was his home. He set the mug down and took a breath. His heart beat a little faster, not from nerves, but from knowing what this moment meant. "Lily," he said softly. She looked up, eyes warm, the faintest smile touching her lips. He hesitated for just a second. Then, quietly, he said, "Can you come here?" She closed the file, curious. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, everything's finally right." She walked toward him, bare feet silent on the floor. The morning light framed her like something out of a memory, or maybe a beginning. When she stopped in front of him, he reached into his pocket for a heartbeat. She didn't understand. Then she saw the small velvet box in his hand. Her breath caught. Ethan dropped to one knee. The world seemed to go still, the city beyond the windows, the steady tick of the clock, even the air between them. Only his voice moved, steady, low, full of quiet truth. "I've spent years chasing things that didn't matter," he said, "trying to build a life that looked perfect from the outside. But every time something fell apart, you were the one who reminded me what was real. You didn't save me with grand gestures. Lily, you saved me with your kindness, your honesty, the way you never walked away." She blinked, eyes shining, one hand trembling against her chest. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, no diamonds, no spectacle, just a thin band of gold, polished and warm. "I don't want the years ahead to be about success or reputation. I don't want a perfect life." He paused, looking up at her, his voice softening. "I just want to hold your hand through whatever comes forever." For a long, suspended moment, Lily didn't speak. Her eyes filled, and her lips parted in a soundless breath. Then she knelt down, meeting him halfway. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." He smiled, a little unsteady now. "I think I do." She laughed softly, the sound wet with tears. "You sure you're not just saying this because we finally got through everything?" He shook his head. "I'm saying it because getting through everything showed me what I couldn't lose." She looked at the ring, then back at him. "It's simple. It's meant to be," he said, "like us." Her eyes closed for a second as a quiet, trembling second before she whispered, "Yes." He exhaled, relief and joy washing through him all at once. His hands were steady as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The morning around them felt alive again, the faint hum of the city. the warmth of sunlight across their faces, the steady rhythm of two heartbeats finding each other. After a while, she whispered, "Do you remember that first night, the gala? You were about to lose everything." He smiled, eyes still closed. "And I found you." She smiled back, her voice soft. "No. Ethan, you didn't find me. We found each other." He kissed her forehead gently, the kind of kiss that holds a lifetime in it. That's the part I never want to forget. They stood together, arms around each other, the morning unfolding slowly. The city outside began to stir horns, footsteps, laughter, but in their small corner of the world, time seemed to pause. Later, they sat by the window with coffee in silence, watching people hurry by on the street below. Lily turned the ring gently on her finger, as if still getting used to the weight of it. "It's strange," she said quietly. "It doesn't feel like a new beginning. It feels like the middle of something that's always been." He looked at her, his voice low and sure. "Maybe that's what love really is. Not a start or an end, just continuity." She smiled, eyes glistening in the light. "Then promise me we'll keep it that way." He reached over, taking her hand again, thumb brushing the ring. "I promise." The morning sun had climbed higher now, flooding the room in gold. Somewhere, a church bell rang faintly in the distance. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice almost a whisper. "So, this is what peace feels like." Ethan smiled, eyes on the horizon. "No," he said softly, "this is what home feels like." And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were reaching for anything. They had arrived. The world beyond their window kept moving, the noise, the people, the rush of life, but inside, everything was still, warm, whole. And as the morning light filled the room, the only sound left was quiet breathing. Two hearts, one promise, the kind that didn't need to be shouted to be real. The afternoon sun drifted gently through the garden, brushing everything in soft gold. The air in Vermont carried that quiet scent of pine and wildflowers, and the faint sound of leaves swaying in the wind. It was early September, the kind of day that makes the world feel tender, as if it knows something sacred is happening. Rows of white daisies lined the path, their petals trembling lightly in the breeze. The chairs were simple, the guests few. It wasn't the grand wedding the world once expected from Ethan Walker, the billionaire CEO whose name used to fill headlines. It was smaller, slower, real. Lily stood at the far end of the garden, sunlight spilling across the lace of her gown. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to be perfect. She looked like herself, soft, calm, radiant in the kind of way that comes from peace, not polish. Her hand trembled only slightly as she held the bouquet, a mix of daisies and baby's breath, tied with a thin ribbon. When the music began, a quiet melody played by a single violin, Ethan turned. And just like that, every sound faded, the noise of the world, the past, the memories that once hurt, they all stilled. All he saw was her. Their eyes met halfway down the aisle. The moment felt endless. Margaret, his mother, sat in the front row, a handkerchief pressed to her lips, tears glimmering in her eyes. She had always been composed, always poised, but that day she wept openly, not out of sadness, but gratitude, the kind that only comes when life gives you back more than you thought you'd lost. When Lily reached him, Ethan took her hand, steadying her trembling fingers with his own. They smiled small, quiet smiles, the kind only two people who've walked through fire can share. The ceremony was brief, spoken softly beneath the shade of a maple tree. Promises were exchanged not with grand declarations, but with quiet certainty. "I do," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I do," he replied, his thumb brushing against her hand as if to seal the words. And when he leaned in to kiss her, there was no applause. No camera flashes, just the sound of wind and the rustle of leaves, the gentle hum of life moving forward. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, The guests lingered in small groups, laughter mixing with the music of crickets. Margaret approached Lily, holding her close for a long moment. "You've given him back his heart," she said softly. "Thank you for that." Lily smiled through tears. "He found it himself. I just reminded him where to look." From a distance. Ethan watched them, his heart swelling with something too full for words. When Lily turned toward him, her eyes found his, as if no space had ever existed between them. They slipped away for a while, walking beyond the garden toward the edge of the meadow. The grass brushed softly against their legs, the light turning the world into gold and silver. "It feels unreal," Lily murmured. Ethan smiled. "It feels earned." She glanced up at him. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything every day?" he admitted. "And every day. I thank whatever fate or chance gave me one more try." They stopped by the old wooden fence, looking out at the distant fields where the wind danced over the tall grass. Lily leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For a long while, neither spoke. That silence wasn't empty. It was full of the weight they'd carried and finally put down, full of the lives they'd rebuilt, slowly and gently. After a time, Ethan turned to her, his voice a quiet thread in the breeze. "You know," he said, "life's never going to be perfect." She looked up at him, smiling. "I know." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his eyes soft. "But you're the perfect part of it." Lily's laugh came out as a breath, trembling and bright. "You still remember how to make words sound like forever." He smiled. "That's because forever finally feels real." As the last light of day stretched across the sky, the world seemed to pause with them. Somewhere, the violin music from the garden drifted faintly through the air. The sound mingled with the breeze, wrapping around them like a promise renewed. Back at the house, lanterns flickered along the porch. The guests were dancing now, Margaret laughing with one of Ethan's old friends, her earlier tears replaced by joy. Everything felt soft, human, whole. Lily and Ethan walked back hand in hand. The sky had turned deep blue, with one bright star breaking through. They stopped beneath it. For a moment, neither said a word. Then Lily whispered, "Do you think we'll always remember this?" Ethan looked at her, his voice low and sure. "We don't have to remember. We're living it." She smiled, and he kissed her again, slow and tender, the world fading around them until there was nothing left but light and breath. Later that night, when the garden emptied and the stars deepened, Lily sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl. Ethan joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. They sat quietly, listening to the crickets, the hum of the wind, the heartbeat of the world at rest. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, not tonight." She smiled, turning the ring on her finger. "Good." They fell silent again. The kind of silence that comes only when everything that needed to be said has already been lived. In the distance, fireflies blinked among the trees, their faint light rising and falling like small, wandering souls. Lily watched them, her voice almost a whisper. "It's strange. I used to think happiness was something you chase, but now it feels more like something you stand still for." Ethan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern glow. "Maybe that's why it finally found us." She reached for his hand, and he held it tightly. The night deepened. The stars above shimmered, endless and kind. And in that quiet garden, where it had all begun again, 2 hearts once battered by the noise of the world beat together in perfect rhythm. No more running, no more storms, just stillness. And somewhere in that stillness, a single truth lingered, soft and certain. Life would never be perfect, but love, in its gentle imperfection, finally was. As we grow older, life teaches us that love is rarely found in grand gestures or flawless moments. It's in the quiet patience of staying when it would be easier to walk away, in the courage to forgive, even when the past has been unkind. Ethan and Lily's story reminds us that broken things can be rebuilt, not to what they once were, but into something truer, stronger, and more human. We spend much of our lives chasing perfection, success, image, approval, but in the end, peace comes when we stop running, when we learn to see beauty in imperfection, to find grace in honesty, and to hold on to people who make us feel at home in our own skin. The world changes, time moves faster, but kindness and loyalty never go out of style. They are the quiet forces that hold everything together when life begins to fall apart. Perhaps that's the real lesson, that love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who stays through loss, through noise, through change, and realizing that, together, that's enough. Thank you, dear listeners, for spending your time with us and for letting this story touch your heart. If Ethan and Lily's journey reminded you of the quiet power of love, kindness, and second chances, please take a moment to share that feeling forward. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale is a gentle reminder that hope still lives in the ordinary moments of life. Your support helps us keep bringing warm, heartfelt stories to your ears. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep believing in the beauty of simple, honest love.